Hello everybody, Steve Farmer here. It's been a while since I posted any games, but I recently made a new friend who's somewhat new to chess, and we were talking about pattern recognition. So I thought I'd do a series on pattern recognitions. Basically, pattern recognition is a form of determining when you have a combination laying in wait. They can be simple, intermediate, and complex. So I'm going to give a sample in this video of what we're going to be coming against, and these are all going to be from my own games. So this first example is a very simple one. My opponent played the move f6. Very simple pattern recognition. It's white to move. What do you play here? First thing you want to notice is that the light squares around the king are very weak, extremely weak. Now we can take into account other things about black's position as queen's all the way over on b2 and white's barreling down on the king side. But that's really irrelative at this point. The most relative points in this position are the rook on d1 keeps the black king from coming over to the d file. And with his new move of f6, weakening the light squares, it's very easy to see now that simple queen check on h5, king has only one square, and queen mates on f7. That's a very simple case of pattern recognition. And being aware of these patterns is very important, even the simple ones, because there have been cases where players have missed mate in one move. Strong players. I think it was Ivanchuk in a 5-minute game had, probably about a minute and a half on his clock, spent about a minute thinking about the position and was completely overlooked the simple queen takes rook is mate type thing. So it can happen. So be on the lookout on every move for the very simple to the very complex. Now, sometimes the very complex are too deep to see all the way through, and we'll get to that later on. In this position, black played queen to e6. Okay, pattern recognition time. What is the move? It's very simple. This one is just simply a fork. Knight takes c7 check, forking to king and queen. King moves and we take the queen and win easily. Yes, even a one-move pattern is a pattern recognition. So understanding the simple like this will get you to help understand the complex that we'll get into later on, because you're going to use a combination of maneuvers, forcing moves, checks, etc. And then ultimately it's going to end up with a very simple pattern recognition like this. And some patterns are very, very similar or often absolutely repeat themselves in games. In this particular position, white would be okay if he just castles. I'd still like black's position better, but white would be okay. But here he played bishop to b2. There's a problem with this. And I've actually played this in several games. I've had this happen. So it's not a rare occurrence. By the way, to get the most out of these pattern recognition videos, I would recommend that you pause the video when we have a new position to look at and you're trying to find the pattern, so that you can have a chance to try and figure it out. In this case, bishop takes f2. Now, how long did it take me to spot this little pattern? Not long at all. I think I'd find it in just a couple seconds in a 5-minute game, if even that. So we just check the king, so he has to take, so he can't castle. Now queen to b6, and we're forking the bishop on b2, and we have check on the king. So he has to move the king, and now we take here. Now it's not that black has just won a pawn. Like I said, he stopped white from castling, and that pawn on e5, well, there's no saving it. It has a short and gloomy life. So he does this as an attempt that maybe I'm just going to drop the queen straight back, but no, I can take here. because if he attacks the queen, I can play knight takes knight check and then move the queen. So out of this, I've won a second pawn, and the rest was easy. Okay, this one is a little more complex, yet it's still in the simple category. Pattern recognition can help you to recognize when you can defend as well. Normally, moving pawns in front of your king is not a wise thing to do, but here it is the best thing to play g4. Now, I'm attacking the bishop. He has a couple choices. He can retreat to e6, but in that case he's going to have to wreck his pawn structure around his king. Yeah, that's not desirable, so the other alternative is to play e5 to counterattack, and the third is to consider taking on g4. In the game, my opponent took on g4, which is not the best. But his options were not all that attractive. He could play bishop to e6, and now I can play bishop takes e6, and if he plays queen takes e6 to save his pawn structure, he just drops the pawn on c7. So to avoid losing the pawn, he'd have to play f takes e6, and after rook to e1, white just holds a nice, comfortable edge out of the opening. Going back, the alternative is to play e5 with a counterattack, and white just simply takes on e5. Now, if knight takes on e5, we capture on a7, hitting the rook must move, and we can capture on e5. White's doing fine. Or bishop takes e5, and d takes e5. And again, white has a nice comfortable edge out of the opening, and he's up a pawn. So I'm sure that didn't look attractive to my opponent after I played g4. He thought for a while and he sacrificed. But this is wrong on several levels. When you're attacking, you need to have at least 3 pieces in the attack. In this case, with a pawn on f2, knight on f3, bishop on f4, black really needs to have like 4 pieces attacking. And we're going to see that just a simple pattern recognition, I could make this move g4 without having to calculate the sacrifice too deeply. So I take, and he takes with check. Now bishop to g3. In fact, he only has 1 piece attacking. So he attacks my knight. I just drop it back. He now tries to get another piece in the attack, but it's just too little too late. Knight h2 offers the trade of queens. He retreats, but now I play queen to g4, and now he accepts for some reason. So here we are. Black has got 2 pawns for his bishop, but it's not enough. And here he should just play bishop to g7, and white's in a very comfortable position. But here he plays the move king to g7, which is just absolutely worse, because when you're behind in material, you don't want to trade material. It's okay to trade some pawns, but not pieces. It was better to drop the bishop back. But here he loses another pawn, and after the rook comes and hits my bishop, I hit his rook guarding the c pawn. Simple little pattern recognition, which is going to end up winning a 3rd pawn, and that is going to bring the piece count up to 1 full piece for white. The win from here was quite simple. Now we'll move on to more intermediate types of pattern recognition. And this game, I have black against Ed Yetman, and Ed was helping me with a training match, testing out different ideas against my King's Indian. Very great to work with people around your rating or slightly higher to improve. If you don't have a stronger player, one thing you can do is get with somebody that's of equal strength and then use a computer. One of you plays with the computer to help you find the best moves, not absolutely killer moves. You don't want to punish the guy that you're training with, but you want to use the human element combined with the computer, and you can make some good progress with doing that. So here he's helping me train against the King's Indian, my King's Indian, and here he makes a very natural looking move. He plays f3. Now, again, I advise you to pause and see what you can find for this little pattern recognition thing. This is quite simple. It may not seem simple if you're fresh to the game. One of the techniques, we already saw one, which was the fork, where that knight went to c7 and forked the king and queen. This is a simple case of an overloaded piece. In this case, it's the queen on d1 is overloaded. And how do I mean that? You look at this and you got to ask yourself, how can that be? Nothing's hitting the knight on d4, so the queen doesn't really need to protect that, and nothing's hitting the rook on e1. But with one move, that changes. Knight takes d5. Okay, so the knight's hit on d4. And probably best here is just to ignore, and not take the knight at all. Just move the knight away or something. But Ed played e takes d5, and this gets us to illustrate the overload on the queen. Now we can play rook takes e1, and the queen is drawn away from protecting the knight on d4. And now bishop takes d4 check, and white just went down a pawn. And not only that, as I said, with players of similar strengths, you're going to run into situations where a pawn may be enough, but when there's a second weakness like this pawn on d5, it's too much. So Ed actually, he played on for a bit, but it was a losing battle. Here's another example from the training match with Ed Yetman. I have black playing the King's Indian naturally. And here's a kind of a weird situation. My thoughts as a chess player are that knight on g2 is very suspect. That the bishop that's on g3 is usually on g2 in these kinds of positions, being fianchettoed. So, gets me to thinking, I got to have some kind of attack here. And the truth is, if Ed had simply played rook to g1 here, he would have been fine. He played knight to d2. Well, this allowed me to bring my queen into the attack as well. Now, this is important because the queen backs up the knight on f3. So if white plays knight takes knight, I can always capture with the pawn, and he's not going to be able to recapture with his queen. So it's an even trade, but still leaving him with weak light squares around the king. In fact, that is what he played. So your natural instinct is to recapture right away. There's a better move here. Pattern recognition pops into here. I played bishop takes g2. Now after king takes g2, I played g takes f3. And the point here is after king g1, we got e4. What this does is this pawn secures the pawn on f3. And this allows the idea of queen to h3 to g2, delivering mate. Okay, so king to g1 doesn't work because of e4. What about king h1? Maybe you can bring that rook back to g1 to protect the mate. Again, pattern recognition comes in. We want to secure that pawn on f3 so that after bishop... Now, best thing for him here is to just give up the bishop. But if he goes bishop c2, we got queen h3. And yes, he can play rook to g1, but now we got the knight hopping into g4, and mate is coming on h2. Can't be stopped. So in the game, after I played g takes f3, Ed just simply resigned. He saw what was coming. Another player that I've had a lot of games with is Fred Duran. Now, in this game, Fred is white, and he's down a pawn, and I have the initiative with the black pieces. Not all pattern recognition cases are going to be leading to immediate mate or something like that. It may be that you're up a pawn and you want to consolidate your position, or actually you're up a pawn, first thing you want to do is find a way to trade material. More material comes off the board, more potency your extra pawn would have. In this case, I'm able to win a second pawn, which is very helpful. But it's also to illustrate the point that once you have won the material, that you're going to want to consolidate, because by the sheer nature of going out of your way to win material, you are taking a piece and putting it out of place. So, for example, your opponent leaves a pawn hanging, you have to move your bishop to take the pawn, and then later you'll have to move the piece back again to get it to its prime position. So you've used 2 tempi for 1 pawn. The saying is that a pawn is worth 3 tempi. That's a very loose translation of that. It's a decent rule of thumb to go by. So if you have to spend 3 tempi to get a pawn, it may not be worth it. You'll have to weigh that in your mind. That's why you often see a player offer the exchange sacrifice, offering a rook for a minor piece. And a lot of times the person that could win the material just foregoes it and says, no, it's not worth it, because that's 2 pawns, but he's going to get more than that in compensation. All right, so in this position, Fred is playing white, and he plays queen to b3. One of the things about having a nice position is you can have so many different ways to win. The move I chose in the game is actually the best. Now, there's the opportunity to play bishop to d5 because the knight is pinned on e3, so he can't capture with the knight, and your bishop is skewering the white queen and the white rook. This is also winning for black, but the move I saw was rook to c1 check. This forces white's hand. Bishop f1 allows bishop c5, and white's just in a terrible way there. So he actually plays king to f2, but this is really not much better, because now I can play bishop d5, and he plays queen to b2. Now technically the best would be to play rook to c3, but I played queen takes f4, just simply winning a second pawn, because I saw the ending position that we'll get to in a few moves here. I wanted to simplify, I wanted to win material and simplify the position greatly. The more simple the position is, the less can go wrong with it. So bishop f3, bishop c5. And the reason I mentioned simplifying is Fred is a tough cookie. He's a hard guy to beat. He's very unorthodox in his play a lot of times, but that also makes him hard to beat. So if I can simplify things, it makes the task a lot easier. So here you can take the rook on c1, which he did, and I take his rook on a2. So we already see that I've won a second pawn, but that's not it. That's not the end of it. I wanted to not just win the second pawn, otherwise I would have gone down that other line. I wanted to simplify, and there is a way that white can do this quickly. After rook g4, which is white's best, I played bishop takes e3, forces queen takes e3, otherwise the queen drops. Queen takes, king takes, and now that the smoke is cleared, I'm up a second pawn, but as I mentioned, you have to get your piece back into play, and my bishop's kind of out there in no man's land on a2. I suppose, I only have 2 squares I can move the bishop to right now. I got b3 and b1. I can't go to c4 because of his rook. I can't go to d5 because he can take with his bishop and fracture my pawns and increase his opportunities to draw, although white's probably still lost there. So the best move here is what I played, and that was e5. Why e5? One of the rules that we learn in chess is that if you have one bishop on the board, you want to put your pawns on the opposite color, and I have done that to great effect here. All my pawns are in the dark squares, my bishop's on the light square, so it increases the scope of my bishop. And the ending's quite simple here. It goes rook to b4, play rook to d8, bishop c6. But this allows more simplification. And here's another benefit of having the pawn on e5. White can't play the tricky rook to d4. Alright, so he plays rook to a4, and I decide to make a trade here that simplifies things. Hit his pawn, he gets this one, I get this one. I'm threatening rook c3, and then rook to b3, which is going to be really tough for him, so he plays king to e4. I play king to h7, king to d5, rook to c5 check, king e4, rook to a5, offering the trade. Doesn't want it. I take this, and it's a very simple win from here. Just real quickly to show you, he played on for just a few more moves. And after this, he resigned. So I'm going to create a passed pawn on the far side of the H file or the G file, and he's not going to be able to hold everything back. Okay, this is my game against Dionisio Aldama, the Beast. He's a FIDE master. No, I think he might. Yeah, I think he's IM. I think he's IM now. He's an international master. And here I could have played queen takes d5, rook takes, bishop takes b6, cb6, c4, rook takes d3, knight fe5, knight e5, knight e5. And I think white has a slight edge here. But instead of queen takes d5, I wanted to attack, so I decided to keep the queens on the board. I played c4. Now, the move he played just absolutely rocked me back. And I didn't think it could be played at all. And he didn't think for terribly long before this, but this shows why he has the name The Beast. Plays queen takes f3. You know, here I am, I think I was 1800 around the time, and I'm like, yeah, there's no way anybody's going to sack a queen against me. Yet it happened. So, you pretty much have to take, because otherwise you're just down a piece. And h takes g4. So he's got two pieces for the queen. The question is, does he have compensation? Well, in time pressure, this looks like a good move what I come up with. In time pressure, though, I played c5. If we had more time to think about it, and I was considering this move, was queen takes b5. Now he gets some play with knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, bishop takes d4, rook to a5, g takes h3, rook a e1, h2 check. Now, unfortunately, king to h1 is met by bishop f3 mate, so can't do that. King f1 is met by promotion, king to e2, and then queen takes f3, and he's winning the game. But king g2, h1, rook takes, and I was scared of this, and I just couldn't see beyond here. I thought if his rook was on d6, I might well be lost in this, but after king h2, if bishop takes f2, then I have queen takes e5, and I'm out of trouble. And if rook to d8, I have king to g3. And I think white can survive this. Again, white's up queen for two bishops. But I didn't see that. In time pressure, I played c5. Bishop a5, rook takes. I got to get rid of the bishops. They're just in my way too much. So now he's got material compensation, pretty much, because he can capture on f3 here. Here I should have played queen a6, but I played c6 first. Plays rook takes h3. Now I have big problems. Rook to h1 mate is threatened, and unfortunately I don't have enough here. I played c takes d7. Queen a6 doesn't do anything because king d8. Bishop to g5 check. Queen a8, king e7, rook takes e5. I saw this, but it doesn't quite work because after king d6, white has no way to block the bishop from king rook 2. If what I'm saying there is, if there was a way to get this bishop to f4 to h2, I could survive, but there's no way to do it. So I played in this position. Pawn takes rook check, king d8. And I resigned after this because after bishop g5 check, he just blocks, just like in the line we just looked at. So, pattern recognition is what Dionisio went off of on this way back here after c4. He played the amazing queen takes f3. Not entirely accurate, but it was enough to win because this was a short time control game. However, I get my revenge. In this position here, I'm playing Virgil Melnick, who has the black pieces, and he is a FIDE master. He's rated 2290 or something like that. He played a6. Now, pattern recognitions can come in openings too. When you realize that black really should have his knight on f6 rather than playing a6, you begin to see what happens after a6. You go, well, I can throw a knight in on d5 because he's not stopping me. That's a pattern recognition. It's also opening theory, but that's how opening theory gets developed, is by what can occur in different patterns. So it's very important that he played knight f6 before a6. But now I go knight to d5. And now his best is to play knight takes d4, bishop takes, queen takes e5. And white has a decent opening edge here. He's got the d5 square. He'll play queen c3 and castle long and be very comfortable with that position. And Virgil makes another mistake here. He plays e6 for some reason. And this game is chock full of pattern recognitions from beginning to the end. So here, with this, I see a giant hole on b6 and c7. But the first thing to do is remove the guy on c6. Now, it doesn't matter which way he takes. The result would be the same if he takes with the pawn. But he took with the bishop. Now bishop b6. Queen to c8. Knight to c7. King to e7. Earlier in the video, I mentioned that sometimes the player who can win the exchange doesn't take it. Here's a good example of that. Here I played queen to d3. And here, this was a calculated, I don't want to say risk, but it was a calculated line that I couldn't see all the way through because he can win the pawn on b2. But if he does that, he's not doing anything to protect his king anymore. He's not doing anything to develop any more pieces, and he's certainly not saving the rook on a8. So it was a calculated risk to an extent. He plays bishop takes b2, which is just absolutely flat out losing. He should play rook to b8, just salvage the rook, and then white castles long and has almost a full piece worth of advantage, even though the material's equal on the board. That's how bad black's position is. So bishop takes b2. Rook to d1. Now he has a tender spot on d6, and he has the rook hanging on a8. So his best here is just simply to play queen to d7 and allow me to have the rook for free, rather than he plays bishop to e5, which he played in the game. The problem here is that I can take the rook again, or I can press forward with the attack. So to do that, I decided to castle. This is a game in 15, so it was a rapid game. I castled. Now f4 is a very potent threat because once the bishop leaves the defense of the d6 pawn, his whole house of cards comes crashing down. So, to make up for this, he played d5. Now when I offered the pawn on b2, I had seen this position, and I had this check. I was hoping to go on a nice little king hunt here. If bishop to d6, then we take, king takes, and I take here, and I simply win the exchange. He can't take the bishop on c4, so he has to take the knight, and I can trade on d5, and his king is still exposed. Nice, happy game for white. He can't really go straight back. If he goes king to d8, knight takes a8, still is the same thing as king's on the d file. He can't go to e8 or f8, so he's really got one choice, and that's king to f6. So now I played knight takes a8. This is a really beautiful position to ponder for a bit here. What are my pattern recognition ideas in this particular position? Well, let's start tracing them out for you. One of the things from the psychological point of view of chess players is they tend to see the pieces as bundles of energy. For example, here, we see the power of the bishop cutting off the king from getting to e7 or f8 if he goes to g7. We have the power of the queen and rook on the d file, ready to penetrate at a moment's notice. We also somewhat visualize in our head that this file is already open in some way, and that's very easy to conceive. f4, f5 can come, and then we have this going, which really means that black has only to shelter g7 and g5 for his king. So after I take the rook on a8, he actually played queen takes a8, but there's a couple of ideas here. What if he takes the bishop? Now, oddly enough, even the bizarre-looking queen to d8 check is worth playing, and that should be good enough to win. But I was planning on playing queen takes c4. And now, again, with the choices, he's got actually b5 and queen takes a8. Queen takes a8, we have f4. As I mentioned, we're starting to bring these bundles of energy to life. And now if bishop b2, we got queen to b3, and there's no place for this bishop to go. So right now on the board, black's got 2 pieces for the rook he gave up. But here, he's going to lose a 3rd piece. So bishop c7, or to b8 would be the only moves, but that would block the queen in. Now a nice move here, bishop d4 check. Now to say I saw this all the way back at offering to b-pawn, I can't remember what move that was, but that was real early on. I somewhat did. I saw that the lines were open and that this is a possible position. So now e5, f takes e5. Again, now his king can go to e7. He has a few more places he can go. But when I was calculating this, I didn't need to go quite this far. You know, I could go back to like right here and say, okay, he's got 2 pieces for the rook, but his king's way exposed. That's enough for me to get into the pattern and say it was worth it. But let's carry it on here to see if that intuition was correct. If he plays king to e7, then we have queen takes f7. The rook is protecting the queen, so king to d8. Now bishop b6. It's check. The rook on d1 is giving check. Bishop d5, only move, really. Rook takes d5. Yeah, he has no choice. He's got to run, and then we mate. So king e7 doesn't work at all. King g7. Queen takes pawn check. And now this bishop comes on a different diagonal. And if he plays g5, we get this pretty little well-known type mate. Pattern recognition. And if king h5, we have another tricky little move. Rook to f5 check. Pawn's pinned. He's got to move the king. Now, if he goes king to g4, we get a similar as into what the other line would be. Queen f1 is mate. This is pattern recognition as well. If king h4, then g3, trying to bring about that same pattern we saw. So if he goes king to h3, well, let's go to king g4, rook g5, and then we have the same mate. And if king h3, then we go here check, because if he takes the rook, queen takes h5 is mate. Pattern recognition. And if king g4, rook h4 is mate. Alright, so that was on king to g7. What about king g5? Well, if it wasn't working in the other way, how can it be working in this? Bishop e3 check. King comes up. He doesn't have any other place to go. He can go to h4, I guess. But then you can play rook f4. So king up, queen checks, king h4, g3 check, king h3. And here's another little pattern recognition. Check. King h4, queen f3. No choice. g4 check. And then mate. Okay, so all of those were out of black taking on a8. What if he decides to counterattack here? b5. You start adding up material, say, I'm up the exchange, the pure exchange right now, so I can get my knight out of dodge with knight to b6. And a couple choices here. B takes c4, knight takes c8. White's up the exchange, and black's position is still pretty crappy, so white's doing well. The alternative is queen to b8. Queen comes back to d3. He can win a pawn, but king comes over, bishop f4, knight to d7, check, forking the king and queen, so he's got to take. And though black has managed to get a pawn for the exchange, which normally is compensation, I don't think it's enough compensation here. After knight h6, bishop to here, trade bishops and queens, and this is just looks like a very rough ending for black. I think white should win this pretty handily. Going all the way back, Virgil decided to take on a8. Okay, so now I played ed5, bishop takes d5, and now king to g7, trying to find some shelter for his king, which is natural. But it's leaving me still with the pure exchange up and the initiative. So bishop d4 is kind of a cute move. I want to trade material to make my material superiority felt more. Okay, And this does it just nicely, because if he takes on d5, I play bishop takes e5, and then queen takes bishop on d5, winning a piece in the process. So he takes knight f6, bishop takes c6, b takes c6, rook fe1, c5. Black gets rid of an extra pawn here for some counterplay. Rook c8. Now he's got everything into play now, but he is down the exchange and a pawn, which is not healthy for him. Now queen e7 is probably the strongest move here, but I played queen to b6 because I saw a little pattern where I could get rid of some more material, and that's, remember, my main goal. So here he plays rook to c6. Better was rook takes c2, and then I was thinking about rook to d6. White is still clearly winning in this line, so we won't discuss it much further, but what I want to show you is the idea of trying to simplify. You still use patterns all the way down to the simplification stage of the game. Rook to d8. So he's attacking my queen with his rook, which his queen is protecting. Now I'm attacking his queen with my rook, which my queen is protecting. Tit for tat. Okay, so he goes to b2. This allows me a nice little trick. Now, this is extremely important, and it comes with experience. It also emphasizes the importance of looking at Grandmaster games of the past. Getting to know the history of the game of chess. Very important. Here we have a position where white is up the exchange and a pawn. Winning material advantage, most definitely. And there's probably several different ways to win the game, like rook to d1, getting ready to bring the rooks down on this, down to attack the knight on f6 and then put him on the 7th rank. Very easy to do. But while I was playing this game, I know this position. I know this is a win for white because I saw Capablanca win a nice game like this. And then after I saw Capablanca win a game like this, I saw several other examples of it. So that led me to play rook takes f6. And strange as it may be, after king takes, I play rook to a1. And now he has only one defense here, and that is to play, in my opinion, is the best defense is to play rook c5. He doesn't play this, and to hold it on. This is actually from the 34th game of the World Championship between Alexander Alekhine as white. Okay, so he actually was playing white in this game, and Alekhine won it. Capablanca had won one before that I saw. The computer doesn't agree that this is a win. That's because there's no 11-piece database for the endgame tables. It's a win for white. Black is all tied up addressing the issue of this pawn. He can't do anything until he can get that pawn off the board. In the meanwhile, white will, say, put a pawn up here, bring his king around, and eventually create a breach on the king side with something like this. And black's going to have to give way. If black does something to prevent that, which means he's going to have to keep his king over on the king side, white's alternate plan is quite simply to bring the king up here and force the rook off the defense of that square and keep pushing it forward. Any way you look at it, he has got to do something about that A pawn eventually, either sooner or later. And when he does that, white's going to be in position to come and gobble up the pawns on the king side. So I knew this from past experience. And here he plays king to e6. He figures he might have a way to do this with his king. Unfortunately, now if he goes king to a7 here, I go here, and then I'm winning the king side pawns, because if he plays h pawn up, then I go rook f6 and pick up the g pawn. Very simple win. So here he plays king to a8, rook to b7, f5, rook takes h7, rook a2, a7, rook a7, and here I played rook h8 check, and then I checked on h7, and we repeated the position one time. and then we got to rook takes a7, and this is just winning for white. Yeah, it's a very easy win. White's coming in to grab the pawn on g6 and then advance the h-pawn. Very simple. So we can see that this whole entire game was a bunch of different pattern recognitions lumped together. Well, not together, but in succession of one another. From one position to the next, there's a slightly new pattern, adjusted pattern coming up. That's how you have to play chess, is to not just look at one piece moves here and, oh, you improve that piece. Sometimes that's the case. Sometimes you're just looking, like you look at some of Magnus Carlsen's games, he'll play very computer-like chess. He'll move a piece and it'll increase his position by 2/10 of a pawn. He'll move another piece 1/10 of a pawn better. You know, move another piece, again 2/10 of a pawn. You add those 2/10, 1/10, 2/10, all of a sudden you're up like a pawn and a half. You know, so sometimes it is very simple chess. Other times it's very complex. And when you're dealing with complexity, pattern recognition helps. Ha ha ha! What do you expect for watching one of my videos on Halloween? Seriously though, I hope you enjoyed this. And I plan on making more if I get people that like this on my YouTube. If I get likes on it, I'll post some more. Alright guys, until next time, good luck.